Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Today's guest is an expert at helping small businesses, authors, and startups increase their visibility as well as their credibility. He founded eReleases over 24 years ago after realizing that small business owners could dramatically benefit from affordable press releases. And so he's helped small businesses get published in places like the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Bloomberg, many others. So we're going to dive right in with our guest, Mickie Kennedy. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Mickie, I think it's fair to say that the whole PR world has changed dramatically, let alone just in the past 24 years, but even, heck, for that matter, even in the last several months. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's constantly evolving and changing, and you either adapt and incorporate the changes and welcome them, or you kind of get left behind.
Sure. Now, the way I see it is PR is oftentimes misunderstood. I see those people that think of PR as saying, hey, I'm going to turn around and submit a press release about my newest product launch or my newest product release. But many founders and CEOs who take that route, they fail to get the traction that they hoped they were going to get with the press release because, after all, they're not Apple or they're not Microsoft. And
Right.
so for most of the world, they don't really care about what it is that is going on with their new product. So for somebody to get published in the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Bloomberg, what's the angle that they have to take?
I think that they really have to be doing something a little bit different than everybody else. And the product launch press releases that I see are here's our new product and here's a list of features. And I think that they fail to take into account is journalists are basically storytellers, and it's hard to tell a story with just a product and a list of features. So I encourage clients to incorporate a use case study. Here's someone who used it. These were the results that they achieved by using the product, and then having a great quote by them. And that builds out that arc of a story that a journalist can tell about a product launch. A lot of people do assume that if you're not large, nobody's going to care about you. But a lot of journalists like to profile small businesses, mom and pops, because they get the credit for, sharing this discovery with their audience and saying, look at this little nugget that I found and I'm putting a spotlight on. You really have to know what you're doing that's different than everyone else in the marketplace. And if you don't have that nailed down, then I think it's a great opportunity for you to build out what may be a unique selling proposition or what makes you different from everybody else. Another thing is you can become the news. I always take clients who feel like they're beating their head against the wall and not getting any success. Do a industry survey, interview or send out a survey through, create one through SurveyMonkey. I like 4 questions per page, 4 pages, 16 questions. If they give up halfway, you've got 8 responses. Put the most important questions first and partner with an independent or small trade association. Ask them to share that link with their members. Tell them that you are doing a press release over the wire and that you'll mention them in it. So they see that often as a win-win because the smaller and independent trade associations don't get all the attention and notoriety that the large trade associations do. So often they'll send it to their members. And I have clients that repeatedly get hundreds and hundreds of responses by having their survey sent out like that. Just ask really interesting questions that are relevant right now. I mean, we're post-pandemic. There's some economic uncertainty. You might ask, is your planning to spend on marketing over the next 2 quarters less, more, the same? What's going on within your industry? And then you're going to want to include in the press release, a really captivating quote or two about the analysis, why you felt the survey skewed a certain way. And it's a great way to sort of make yourself the expert within the industry just by claiming it. And a lot of people do it, and it works extremely well to get media pickup.
One of the press releases that we submitted a number of years ago took a controversial opinion to something that was popular, and it was about Groupon. And we put out a press release for why businesses shouldn't use Groupon. And when we put out that press release, I was in the Cayman Islands and I got a phone call shortly thereafter from Fox Business. and they wanted to do an interview right off the bat as far as why I said that and if I could elaborate a little bit more for a piece that they were working on. But that's just something, again, when the whole world is talking about one thing, if you can find a different angle, something that fewer people are talking about, it's a way to take notice.
Right. I call that be the friendly jerk, aka the contrarian. If everybody in your industry is saying X, you joining the conversation and agreeing with it, you're not going to stand out. But if you can rationally be the other side, the contrarian, put out the cons, the negatives, but there's challenges. So if you were the person to say, maybe we shouldn't be pushing electric cars so fast because we haven't solved the battery situation, the mining to get those minerals out is very terrible for the environment, labor issues with children getting the minerals out. Also, we haven't solved what we're going to do at the end of the life of these batteries. And are we just creating a new environmental hazard? And, nobody would say that person's crazy or irrational. They would say that that's a very rational con side to this issue. And if nobody is out there plugging in the negative or the con side, it's often because there's no one raising their hand and positioning that. Journalists say they want to cover both issues, both sides of an issue. They don't want to just present one side, but often they do. And I think it's just because no one's claiming the other side. I think being rational and logical through it, minimizes anything that would come out negative from that.
So let's talk about alienating the customer base because that's really a hot button conversation. We just saw recently that Budweiser decided that they were going to take what I think they believed was going to be a more inclusive type of approach, but actually what it did is it alienated a good percentage of their actual customer base. When do you recommend taking a stance, like whether Budweiser or Nike or any other of these experts do, and when do you recommend just keeping your mouth shut?
I often would caution to say that there's the possibility of trying to be inclusive. It can go viral. And I think that that's what happened with the Budweiser campaign. My understanding of it, it was an influencer campaign, which they generally felt like, oh, we get 20 or 30,000 likes from this inclusive community. And it's just a new additional audience that we can bring into the bud market. They never thought that their core audience would see it. And for years, that was fine. But I think social media and the way that social media blows up took something that was small and marginal and made it front and center. And it became a very divisive issue. I think that, that's the risk that you run when you do influencer campaigns where you feel like, let's just target little pockets of audiences without thinking about, do these audience fit our core audience, our core customer base? And I think that there's a disconnect there because I think that the core audience of people and customers of Bud Light aren't very inclusive. And there are times where I think companies like Nike are like, yeah, we're going to alienate some of our customers, but we believe that this is the right thing. There have been pride events and companies that support, but they've often just done that on the side. And I think that now with social media, those things are becoming front and center and it's being available to everyone. And in some cases, there might be a disconnect. And I just think it's like one of those things you just have to be careful and make sure that any messaging that you do, could it turn off a sizable part of your customer base? And if so, are you okay with that? Or do you want to mitigate that, or what's the best foot forward? And I think that it's one of those things that a company has to decide and be willing to admit, that mistakes get made. And I think that in the case of the Bud Light thing, I personally think that it was a mistake for them to try to, say, let's try to be inclusive in this marginal community, and we'll get credit for that and get new customers. And this can happen isolated in a petri dish, and it won't influence our existing customer base. And it just blew up completely in a way that I don't think that they expected or had thought through.
Sure. It really does come down to a message market match, right? And whatever it is that your core market is, You really want to make sure that you understand the message that you're putting out there and whether or not it matches. Now, I'm not saying to try to be liked by everybody because that in and of itself is a mistake. Howard Stern was probably the very first most notable individual that polarized a certain group of people, and even the people that couldn't stand him and hated him the most for some reason couldn't help but tune in. And then obviously there was the polarization between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. You were either on one side or the other, super, super, heavy on one side. And this continues to go on to some extent, even with companies. But, with small businesses, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take a political stance or you have to take another stance for that matter. It could be even something as simple as, I don't believe in growth hacks. I don't believe in, working with people who are willing to make money at all costs, even if it means that, you're hurting somebody else. I do believe that companies have to get paid in direct proportion to the value that you put out there. That, of course, it might sound safe for our listeners because our listeners, those tends to be the people that we attract, but you'd be surprised at how many people get upset by that because, for them, it's just all about the money and nothing else.
I think that this rivalry that exists between Democrats and Republicans creates an energy, and the media feeds off of it. And I think that some of the major brands have done that successfully. I think like Apple and Windows, Apple iOS,
Yes.
and Android have worked that very well. They're always in the news, and there's this iOS rivalry with Android and things like that. And I think that it can be, very advantageous to rile people up and, speak to pockets of people.
Yeah, especially if you know who your target market is. And it's funny, every time I see something that comes across, some big news topic, particularly as it relates to business, I'll look at it and I say, how can I take a different way? How can I approach it differently? Right now, there's a lot of talk about recessions. And the premise behind my conversation is why I love a recession and why a recession could be one of the best things to happen to your business. And that just takes a little bit of a different spin from everybody else who's crying that the sky is falling. And it gets people to pay attention. Well, wait a minute, I haven't heard this angle before. Why is a recession good for business? Why could this be great? That's just some of the different ways that we could be controversial. Now, when it comes to press releases, I'm actually finding that PR, we're going to see a new wave, a new resurgence in the importance of good PR. And the reason why I say that is because content is becoming very, very much commoditized. You can go on ChatGPT, and in 90 seconds, you can get 20 different titles of, content that could be out there. You can have an SEO optimized article and a really wonderful, brilliantly written SEO optimized article with the H1, H2 tags and so forth. And all of that stuff can be done and created. And people are doing this and they're filling up their websites with a whole bunch of just content. This makes Google's job slightly more difficult because now they're trying to figure out the difference between, great content and content that's just been AI created. We also know that backlinks can be bought, as oftentimes these SEO agencies are just going to these farms and buying all these backlinks. And so it's then up to those who are running the algorithms to figure out who is really the expert and who is not the expert, because we need to feature the experts on the front page and give them preference. So they came out with this EAT algorithm where earned media takes a position in this EAT algorithm as saying, if you have earned media, well, clearly you must be an expert because a credible organization, news organization, is vouching for you. And that's not a link you can buy. That's one you actually have to earn. And so this is, again, where I think that we're going to see a resurgence in press releases as one component of this to get more of this earned media. Because with these AI-based search engines that are coming to the forefront, with this proliferation of content, the commoditization of content, how are they really going to determine who's the real expert and who's just the AI generated experts. And earned media is a massive component to that. How do you feel about what I just said?
I agree. My project manager recently told me, hey, we're paying this writer to write blog posts for us. I've had a blog for like over 15 years, thousands of articles, and I outsource it to a great writer. And my project manager came to me and said, look, we can have Chat GPT do this. And so I was like, show me some examples. And then he comes back and he gives me examples. I run it through a couple of websites that check for human content, and they ranked at like 11% and 12% human. And then I took the articles that my writer writes, and they were like 98% human and 97% human. And I'm like, the two websites that I used were free to detect AI content. And I'm like, if they're able to detect that this is AI for free, I'm pretty sure Google's going to do the same thing. And I think that everything I know about Google, about them wanting authenticity in backlinks, authenticity in content, I think that they're going to give penalties for AI content. That's just my belief. I don't think that they've come out one way or the other about it. And so I just said, let's stick with the writer. I don't feel comfortable using the Chat GPT stuff. That being said, I found Chat GPT to be very useful for putting together organization. Like, how would you approach this topic and organize it? And I find that the way that Chat GPT breaks it down, I feel like that's really important. And I think that, perhaps using it to help you organize your thoughts is really good. But I think at the end of the day, you telling your story the best way that you can is probably, the best way to proceed.
Sure. Now, I always found that when I was, really aggressively creating and putting out press releases, that I had to set my expectations that the first press release I was going to put out there wasn't actually going to get a lot of traction. It only really happened if I was consistent, continued to do it. What I found at a minimum, once a week, I had to put something out. It wasn't until really several weeks went by that I started to get more and more and more traction. Maybe I was doing something wrong, or maybe you'll tell me that consistency is key to getting, good PR. How do we level set expectations for somebody who says, you know what, Charlie, Mickie, this makes sense. I'm going to give it a shot.
I think that you should evaluate PR by doing a PR campaign of like 6 to 8 press releases over a period of time and let you dictate what that'll be. I think a weekly one might be a little too often for most people, but maybe monthly or every other month. I think that it is one of the things that the more press releases you put out, the more visibility you get, and the more journalists feel comfortable saying, hey, this is a company I've seen before. I'm comfortable covering them in a story. It doesn't happen as often now, but during the dot-com crash that I saw, there was lots of people that would just come out of the woodwork and do a press release that, they're going to sell DVDs and pay you $20 to buy each DVD. It's just crazy schemes. And there was a lot of like, even with software, vaporware. And I think that a lot of journalists want to see that you have some legs, that you're a real business, and then, get some visibility. I often recommend that people reach out to their local media and do it themselves rather than using a service. Find out who writes in your industry or would cover something like that. Ask for their email address, build your Rolodex, and just reach out to them as you have ideas. I have people that cover their industry in other markets, and they like, well, I'm based in Baltimore, Maryland, but I'm covering markets in Cleveland and other places. And when I see people in my industry pop up there, I look and say, what was the story about? And I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good angle. Let me make that angle specific to me and reach out to people in my local market. And I feel like reaching out to local media is something, potentially try to do 4 to 6 times a year. And it's one of the reasons that when a journalist is busy and under deadline, they often plug in the same companies again and again. I see it in the Baltimore paper, where the companies that get profiled for their charitable efforts are the same companies that get mentioned in other little news and things like that. And it's because once you reach them regularly, you're at the front of the mind. And when they're thinking of plugging in a company, they'll just go to their email, pull you out, and reach out to you and say, hey, I'm doing this story. Would you be interested in being included? And if a journalist is on deadline and they reach out to them, that they can sort of help them, navigate potential clients that might be able to be plugged into the story. And I think that just being an asset and helping out, local media is a great way to get attention as well. Just sometimes if you have a hot lead that you're probably not even a good fit for, they'll remember that. And, there's a little bit of debt that's created that when you do have something you want to promote, they're more likely to consider it.
Got it. So why would somebody choose to use e-releases? Or let me rephrase that. When is it appropriate to use e-releases or a service like e-releases?
I think when you're looking for national media attention is the time to use a service like eReleases. We started out as an email platform where I was a matchmaker. I spent a year asking journalists if I could email them press releases 25 years ago. And surprisingly, everybody said, "You're not going to charge me for this?" And like, "No, I'm going to send you press releases related to your beat." And almost everyone said yes. You couldn't do that today. And over the years, I incorporated PR Newswire distribution into ours. It's a national distribution of a PR Newswire. And it was a very odd marriage between the two companies because when they reached out to me, I was charging closer to $250 to move a press release. And here was a company that's charging $1,500 to move a press release nationally. And I just explained to them who my customer base was. They're small businesses, entrepreneurs, speakers, authors, and they just don't have $1,500 to send a press release out nationally. And rather than, run away, they were just like, well, let's try to make this a win-win between us. This is a market that our salespeople will never reach out to because these people aren't doing 10 to 20 releases a year. And so they said, for us, it would be, new capital, but it'd also be helping out people. And perhaps some of them will grow and outgrow e-releases and come directly work with us. And so we crafted this thing to work between the two companies. And I think that that's sort of our pillar of why we're different from everybody else. You can go to PR Newswire and spend $1,500, or you could come to us and spend $300 to $400, maybe $500 and get the same distribution. So it's really cost effective from that standpoint. And, the wire is a huge leverage opportunity. If you have messaging that really resonates with the media, you can really go wide. I had a press release that I did for a PR firm early in the pandemic. They were set up something called the Dining Bond Initiative. They sort of modeled it after the War Bond Initiative. And it was basically you could nominate your favorite local restaurant that was likely closed down due to the pandemic. And if they were able to get in touch with them, you could give money that would go directly to that restaurant. And it would sort of be backed by what they called a dining bond gift certificate type thing. It really resonated at the time. We got over 150 articles. We stopped counting at that point. Everybody liked it. And I think it did so well, creating, in excess of $10 million in revenue for local businesses because the messaging was positive at a time where there was a lot of uncertainty and negative news. And it also was empowering.
Got it. So where this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast and our listeners are tuning in, likely asking themselves, how can I use PR to help me take my business beyond seven figures? What's your biggest, best tip for that?
I think it's to start with the idea of building out a PR campaign. And I have a free masterclass that does that. It's sort of about an hour video. It walks you through lots of ideas like being the friendly jerk, the contrarian, doing the survey study. But there's other little nuances that go through there, including local media. And I think that anybody who's new to PR or open to considering it, if they did this, I think they'll come away with an audit of actionable types of press releases they could do for their business. And it's completely free. It's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. And I think that I would recommend anybody sort of start there if you're, considering kicking the tires of PR. I think it's, a lot of people will just look at their competitors and say, oh, they did a press release on this. I'll do something similar for me. And I think that's the wrong way to do it because 95% of press releases fail. And I say start with the more strategic types of press releases, the ones that are more meaningful and have a higher chance of success. And I feel like if you built a campaign of 6 to 8 of these press releases, I think that, maybe a third of them, you'll get, real earned media. The survey and study, often results between 8 and 12 articles every time that it's done effectively, asking the right questions. And that's a really easy win for people. It is a little complicated and a bit of an ask to say, set up a survey and, align yourself with a trade association, but it is something that you can do, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And it's one of the things that you can figure out, what sort of works. And again, I would challenge anybody, no matter how small you are, you know, get out there, because the media likes to curate small companies and small businesses. And very few companies like writing about Microsoft and Google. They do it because they have to. They are a known entity, but they really do like curating a Kickstarter that they saw that's really interesting, or doing something really novel, or profile a business that has an owner that struggled and is now achieving a bit of notoriety or fame. Like, there's restaurants that are getting discovered by influencers on TikTok. And as a result, they're getting articles written about them saying, hey, this TikTok guy profiled this restaurant in Vegas, and they were doing, like $20,000 a month. And now they're doing over six figures consistently. It's been 5 months and they're still making that. And, people like those stories because they're like, wow, this is really cool. And I think that, being open to opportunity and getting yourself out there is really a great way to sort of do that. And I think PR is one of the things that's a great, leveler that small businesses can achieve and do well with.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Mickie, I know we're pushing up against the clock here. If people want to learn more about you and what you do, where can we direct them?
eReleases.com is our website. We have no salespeople, no sales commissions. The only people that answer our phones or chat or email are editors. That's sort of by design. We are all about education and helping people. So feel free to reach out. We walk a lot of people through their first press release and help them build their first PR campaign. If you have a press release, you can send it to us and we'll look at it and get back to you within 2 business days, whether you use us or not. You don't have to be a customer for that. And, my mission is all about education and helping small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I think that, that's a great place to start. Our social media is on the lower right of eReleases.com. And, feel free to reach out to us or follow us and just get to know us. But that strategy masterclass that I have that's completely free is really a great place for anybody to start.
Awesome. And that's eReleases.com/plan.
Yeah. PLAN.
Right. Sweet.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. As a reminder, for more tips, strategies, and information for getting your business beyond 7 figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudette with my new friend, Mickie Kennedy, and I will see you in another episode.